The universe chose you for a path others aren't ready for. That sentence lands like an ember, small at first, and then heat blooms through your ribcage. Maybe it shocks you, or it fits into a place you felt empty for years. Perhaps you resist it. Who am I, you might ask, to be singled out for anything but ordinary life? And yet, if you track the quiet shape of your days, you'll find a trail, a series of small detachments, an odd sharpening of your senses, the way ordinary things have begun to rearrange themselves around you. This is not an error, it is timing. You woke up right on time. Not early in the sense of being premature or mistaken, early in the sense that something in the greater field needed a few people awake before the rest. You've probably noticed that your timing has felt uncomfortable, like arriving at a room where everyone else is still asleep, feeling the urge to whisper instead of shout. That dissonance has a purpose. The tenderness of that dissonance has a purpose. What feels like isolation is often the first stage of readiness. In the beginning, there was restlessness. You would wake in the middle of the night with a pulse of unease and no immediate reason. The old comforts, recipes, routines, friendships that once felt sufficient began to taste a little stale. Hobbies that used to settle you now felt like background noise. You started to hear a different current under your daily life, a low hum that pulled your attention toward questions rather than answers. What if the life I was building was for someone I used to be? What if the agreements I had inherited no longer fit the person waking up in me? This restlessness often arrives as a series of small losses rather than one dramatic collapse. A hobby fades. A job that once seemed secure loosens its grip. You find yourself uninterested in conversations that rely on gossip or comparison. These are not punishments, they are refinements. The universe, in its slow intelligence, begins to remove the props that held up the old identity so the new one can form without competing scaffolding. Soon after restlessness comes detachment. This stage is commonly mistaken for apathy, but it's quieter and more precise. You become less reactive to things that used to disturb you. Where once a slight could unmoor you for days, now it passes like weather. You might feel colder around certain people who were once warm, relationships thin with a soft inevitability. People don't leave because they were wrong for you, nor because you are superior. They leave because vibration is sorting itself. The field is less willing to hold what no longer resonates with your emerging frequency. Your intuition begins to sharpen in this season, but it's not the dramatic sixth sense portrayed in stories. It's a subtle, reliable guidance, a felt tendency in the body or a sentence that arrives fully formed, needing no debate.
You might find decisions become easier. Options that once dazzled you now feel heavy, and the right choice is the one that feels like falling into place. Synchronicities start to appear like punctuation marks, a song lyric that answers a question you hadn't spoken aloud, a stranger who knows the exact detail you were carrying, a book falling open to the precise page you needed. These are not grand miracles, they are lemmas of alignment, small confirmatory signals that you are tuning toward a new frequency. There is also a subtle shedding, patterns, beliefs, inherited fears that peel away in layers. It usually doesn't happen all at once. Instead, you notice old reactions losing their charge. Shame and guilt that once felt permanent grow porous. The language you use to describe yourself softens. Where before you might have identified by roles and labels, daughter, employee, partner, now the default identity is thinner, more vibratory. You sense yourself as a field of tendencies rather than a fixed story. This dismantling can feel like grief and relief at the same time. Grief for what had supported you, and relief at the space newly available. These stages, restlessness, detachment, intuition, shedding, are neither linear nor mandatory in strict order. They spiral. You may find yourself returning to a phase you thought you had left behind, but each pass is quieter with fewer residues. The point is not to rush through them, but to notice the architecture of what's happening. This is the preparatory work the universe orchestrates when it wants certain people awake before the larger shift. Pause for a moment. If this is touching a place in you, pause and notice one small way your life has rearranged itself. It could be as simple as a conversation you avoided last week, a book you found when you needed it, a friendship that no longer carries the same warmth. If you're watching this with others, drop one word in the comments that captures that change. Quiet, shift, alone, clear, whatever fits. No need for essays. One word anchors the moment. Once you accept that your early awakening is intentional, the question becomes, what is it for? Why would the universe wake some people before the rest? The short answer is functional. You are being positioned to stabilize the field as larger changes commence. But that word stabilize needs context. You are not being asked to lead or to save. You are being asked to hold presence. Think of a stormy sea where the tide is shifting. Panic amplifies the turbulence. Calmness reduces it. In human terms, when a significant energetic realignment happens, whether cultural, social, or personal, there is a phase in which those still steeped in the old patterns create dissonance simply by reacting. People who are awake can absorb, anchor, and model steadiness. Your presence acts like an anchor dropped into a rolling waterline. It does not stop the storm, but it offers a fixed point around which motion can reorganize.
Another image, a lighthouse on a foggy shore. It does not pull ships to safety, it signals and stabilizes. A lighthouse beam doesn't insist, it illuminates a pathway. Similarly, your role is influenced by presence. Others may be drawn to your steadiness, not because you instruct them, but because calmness is contagious. You may notice people around you making quieter, more considered choices in your company. That is not because of a speech you gave or an instruction you offered, but because your frequency and comportment provide a template for peaceful reorientation. You might picture yourself as an antenna tuned to a particular band. Antennas don't broadcast mandates, they receive and transmit. As your inner coherence strengthens, you become more responsive to the rhythm of the field and more capable of transmitting a stabilizing frequency. This transmission is subtle, a look that signals understanding, a refusal to escalate when provoked, a consistent practice of showing up with integrity. It's not about charisma or persuasion, it's about being steady. This role comes with a vital ethical boundary. You are not responsible for other people's awakenings. You may serve as a living example, but you do not carry the burden of rescuing anyone. That temptation can feel urgent. When you see someone you love entangled in destructive patterns, the impulse to fix is strong. Resist that impulse with compassion. Fixing implies coercion. Presence implies permission. Offer your steadiness as an available resource, not an ultimatum. If people are drawn, fine. If they aren't, that is not a reflection of your worthiness or failure. It's simply field dynamics, different frequencies, different readiness. The stabilizer role also reframes the loneliness you might have felt. Being early awake often means you are ahead of the majority in awareness, so you stand on the boundary, seeing both the old shore and the approaching tide. This is a lonely vantage only if you treat it as a personal deficit. Reframe it instead as a necessary perspective, one that allows you to navigate the threshold with more grace. You notice patterns before they surface broadly, and so you have the unusual gift of choosing your responses in advance. Use that gift as a quiet stewardship, not an exhibition. A common fear among those who awaken early is the pressure to become a teacher or a savior. That pressure often comes from external expectations, friends, communities, or even online audiences who look to people who have it together. It can also arise internally as an egoic interpretation of being special. Beware of that mirror. Humility is the healthy response. The most effective stabilizers are rarely the loudest. They are the ones who practice an ethic of smallness, small gestures, consistent presence, and the willingness to match their actions to their inner clarity. If you've been awake for a while, you've likely gathered evidence that you are beginning to occup the stabilizer role.
The evidence doesn't typically arrive as headlines. It arrives as alignment. You might notice that conversations that once triggered you no longer do, or that people start to bring you decisions as if you hold a gentler space to consider them. You may see doors close, jobs that no longer fit, friendships that drift, and doors open in ways that feel less like coincidence and more like an answer to an inner request you didn't know you made. Synchronicities are common markers at this stage. They're the universe's small punctuation marks, not commands. A phrase repeats in multiple places. Someone appears with the exact piece of information you needed. An opportunity surfaces that fits your values rather than your ego. These alignments confirm that your frequency is resonating with the field. But remember, they are indicators, not guarantees. They point to a match, not a contract. You may feel nudged towards certain pathways, and sometimes those nudges will lead to visible change. Other times, they simply refine your internal orientation. There is an energetic economy to these shifts. As old patterns dissolve, they release the energy they once consumed. That energy is then available for new configurations, creative projects, relationships based on resonance rather than obligation, daily rhythms that honor your inner tempo. You'll notice decisions becoming lighter because less energy is being spent on maintaining identities that no longer fit. Choices are made from alignment instead of from fear. This is not about ease for its own sake. It's about coherence, actions that reflect the actual shape of your inner field. As your internal coherence deepens, reality becomes more responsive in subtle ways. Responsive does not mean that the universe will fulfill every wish. It means that actions initiated from a place of alignment tend to meet less resistance. You may find mornings where your clarity produces swift practical results, an email that cuts bureaucracy, a conversation that opens unexpectedly, a local opportunity that lines up with your inner aim. Notice these moments. They are evidence of resonance, yet remain wary of reading them as magic. The universe's responsiveness is a reflection of harmony, not a guarantee of outcomes. Another change you might recognize is a recalibration of how you hold boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are contours that protect coherence. When you are awake early, you learn to hold gentleness towards yourself and firmness with what depletes you. That might mean saying no to invitations that demand performative energy, or it might mean withdrawing from debates that seek to pull you into reaction. These choices are not about avoiding difficulty, they are about choosing battles that matter to your field. The ethic here is simple: conserve your resonance. You may also notice a shift in how you relate to fear. Fear becomes more like weather, observed and named, rather than the dominant story.
Old fears may surface as ghosts, but you recognize them and let them pass. In that moment, you are practicing the stabilization you are called to embody, noticing without being led, feeling without collapsing, and acting from the warmth of your center. This is the paradox of being an anchor. It's active precisely because it is largely non-reactive. And then there is the quiet network, the other awakened individuals whose frequency aligns with yours. You may encounter them rarely or in clustered communities online or in person. When you meet another early awakened, there is an instant ease, as if two keys have discovered a similar pattern of grooves. These people are not your followers or your charge, they are peers, signal points on a wider map. Together, you form a field of small stabilizers that can dampen chaos with presence alone. Your meetings may be sparse and simple: shared silence, a brief exchange of observations, a mutual recognition of the work at hand. The network is not a movement or an organization. It is a field intelligence that emerges when enough people occupy similar frequency. Despite all this, you will likely still experience doubt. Doubt is a faithful companion to awakening because it keeps you honest. It asks you to test your assumptions. Are you truly acting from clarity or from an idea of what awakening looks like? Do your actions mirror your intentions? These are productive questions. The practice is not to silence doubt, but to invite it into conversation. Let it ask, and then notice if the answers arise from fear or from resonance. At times you will confront external systems that seem designed to favor the old identities. Jobs with rigid expectations, social circles that reward performative certainty, institutions that depend on compliance. These structures don't change overnight. Early awakening doesn't spare you from negotiation with the world. It prepares you to navigate those negotiations with a differently calibrated energy. Instead of trying to eradicate the structures, you learn to move through or around them in ways that preserve your coherence. Sometimes that means staying and transforming from within. Other times it means stepping away without drama. There is also a moral humility required here. Being chosen by the universe, however you want to understand that choice, does not confer moral superiority. It confers responsibility, to embody steadiness, to act with care, to not use your clarity as a club. The most profound influence you can exert is quiet, refusing the urge to coerce, choosing presence over persuasion, and allowing others the dignity of their timing. You will be tempted to make exceptions, to pull someone into the light you inhabit. Resist the seduction of urgency. People awaken in their own pacing. One practical consequence of this humbling is that your activism may look different. Instead of grand gestures, it will be granular.
You might be the person who listens without imposing, or the one who models a gentler rhythm in a chaotic workplace. You might create a small ritual in your family that slows the emotional tone at dinner. These acts are not flashy, but they are catalytic. They are the quiet repetitions that over time tilt the field. As you embody this role more consistently, you will begin to notice patterns of evidence that confirm you are aligning with something larger than yourself. But evidence here is not a demand for proof. It functions more like a set of friendly nudges, signs that you are attuned.
Perhaps you start seeing certain numbers in meaningful sequences. Perhaps a phrase repeats in books, conversations, and billboards, echoing back what you need to hear. Maybe an obstacle dissolves without strain, or a door you thought would never open swings wide with surprising ease. These alignments can be thrilling, but treat them as companions on the path rather than destinations. There will also be moments when the field pushes back, when the collective inertia of older patterns meets localized shifts in frequency. It can create friction. You may feel misunderstood or dismissed. People might label your changes as phases or midlife crises. Family dynamics can be particularly sticky because of the emotional investments and shared histories. In those moments, remember that standing steady does not require constant explanation. Your task is not to convince the world of your awakening. It is to inhabit it without fanaticism. Let your life be the argument, not your words. And sometimes the rearrangement will look like an ending that feels like a loss. A career that once defined you may end or reshape in ways that hurt. A partnership might dissolve because the vibration no longer fits. These losses are not punishments, they are pruning. Pruning is painful in the moment, but it allows for the growth of a different, often healthier structure. Allow yourself to grieve without believing the grief is evidence of failure. Grief in this context is the respectful clearing of what no longer serves your coherent field. As you move through these complexities, you'll begin to cultivate practices that are less about frenetic self-improvement and more about steady attunement. These practices are simple and symbolic rather than prescriptive. You may start your day with a brief moment of alignment, a phrase that anchors you to your center, or a ritual of putting your hands to your heart and naming 3 things that feel true right now. These are not magical formulas. They are reminders that your attention is the lever by which you tune your frequency. The universe responds to what is steady in you, more than to what you demand. At this point, the lines between inner work and outer life start to blur. Integration is not a future achievement. It is an ongoing practice.
Integration looks like consistency. Choosing alignment again and again in your conversations, decisions, and small daily rituals. It looks like the reappearance of peace in moments that once sparked anxiety. It looks like clarity that does not need to be defended in order to hold. And within this gradual weaving of inner coherence, the external world begins to reflect back incremental changes. Opportunities show up that match your values. Relationships either deepen authentically or move away without rancor. You feel less at war with yourself. All of this is evidence that your path is not solitary in its effects. Your presence creates a local field of possibility. But remember, this is not about control, it's about resonance. Then the signs begin to accumulate in ways that are harder to ignore. A sequence of events that once felt random now reads like pattern. A certain phrase keeps appearing across books and conversations. Decisions that used to require exhaustive deliberation land with an effortless clarity. Doors you feared would never open begin to yield. These are the sorts of synchronistic confirmations that gently nudge you to embody your role more publicly, not as a leader issuing decrees, but as a person willing to be seen steady in the timing of your awakening. You might find that people start to ask for your perspective more often. Colleagues seek your counsel not because you promise answers, but because you hold a space where options can be seen without panic. Friends ring you in the late hours looking for a voice that won't escalate their fear into action. These requests are tempting, easy pathways into a visible form of influence, but they also require discernment. Offering perspective is different from assuming responsibility for someone's outcome. Maintain the boundary between presence and ownership. And yet, even as these external confirmations increase, something else begins to shift beneath the surface, a sense of duty tempered by an inner permission to rest. This is vital. The universe chose you for a path others aren't ready for, but that choice does not obligate constant vigilance. You are allowed to rest. In fact, rest is one of the most potent stabilizing practices you can offer the field. It signals that your steadiness is not performance. It is a sustained quality nourished by replenishment. All of these evolutions, the stages, the role, the small network, the evidence, culminate in a subtle readiness. Readiness is not drama. It's a quiet tightening of purpose. You don't suddenly transform into a different person overnight. Instead, the contours of your presence become clearer. Decisions made from alignment feel less like choices and more like acknowledgments of what you already are. It is at this juncture, often without theatrical fanfare, that the universe's timing becomes most visible. The day-to-day shifts you've lived through begin to articulate into a more coherent path. Opportunities that would have seemed trivial months earlier now appear as the exact next step.
A conversation becomes a collaboration. A solitary practice becomes a small offering to others. Your life begins to mirror your inner frequency more reliably. And yet, right when the pattern seems to fit into a tidy explanation, the field surprises you. Synchronies intensify, new relationships appear that test your boundaries, old certainties wobble. You realize that being chosen is not a line from point A to B, it's a living, flexible commitment to stay awake and present as the terrain changes. This is where the visible evidence begins to pile up in ways that both reassure and unsettle. You may find the same symbolic image appearing across various contexts, an animal that crosses your path during decisive days, a repeated phrase in book titles, a tune that arrives at the moment you need guidance. These are not demands from the cosmos. They are the field's way of speaking in shorthand. Pay attention without turning them into rules. And so the early awakenings who were positioned to hold steadiness start to notice a pattern of responsiveness in reality that asks for a new level of coherence. It is not about control, but concordance. It asks you to refine your habits, to preserve your boundaries, and to deepening your capacity for non-reactive presence. The work becomes less dramatic and more deliberate, small daily acts that unify your inner frequency with your outward life. At the edge of all these developments, something else gathers, an invitation to move from inner maintenance to outward embodiment, not a call to spectacle, but a soft activation. You might feel it as a tightening in the chest, as if your field is preparing to project more publicly, or you might feel a curious calm, an alignment that asks for a visible commitment. This is not mandatory, it is optional and symbolic. It's an invitation to seal your readiness, to declare quietly that you will remain awake and steady as the field shifts around you. Before we move into what this activation can look like in practice, consider the simple evidences that have already been telling you the truth of your role. They are not dramatic headlines, a conversation that changed tone because you didn't escalate, an opportunity that required you to say no and thus protected your coherence, a neighbor who sought your presence in a crisis, not because you claimed authority, but because you had been steady over time. These moments collect like tiny stones in a jar. Over time, they build a structure that supports more visible practice. And then, right as the evidence begins to form a clear pattern, you will often encounter a test, not a grand test, but a quotidian crucible, something or someone that asks whether you will remain steady under pressure. It may come as a heated discussion, a sudden loss, or a tempting shortcut that promises faster influence if you abandon gentleness.
How you respond in these hours reveals whether you have integrated the earlier stages or whether old patterns still hold sway. This is the hinge moment. If you respond from alignment, calm, clear, non-coercive, you reinforce the stabilizer role. The field notices. If you react from old fear, lashing out, controlling, you reinforce the old identity that sought safety in dominance. No one is above slipping. Integration is continual. The difference is that once you are awake early, you begin to recognize the hinge faster. You may stumble, but you can return more swiftly because your field remembers steadiness. So far, everything points toward a living premise. The universe chose you for a path others aren't ready for, not because you are superior, but because your presence stabilizes what is shifting. Your path involves a dismantling of old identity, a sharpening of intuition, and a quiet activation that moves from private practice to embodied public coherence. Evidence arrives as synchronicity and rearrangement, and your choices become the primary means of translating inner clarity into outer responsiveness. And then the field begins to speak with a particular clarity. Small doors that previously creaked now swing open, not because you forced them, but because you were ready to walk through when they appeared. Invitations arrive that demand integrity rather than performative compliance. People seek your counsel for reasons that feel more like respect than neediness. The network of fellow stabilizers coalesces into a loose lattice, an energetic web that is soft but resilient. This is the moment where many early awakenees feel both exhilaration and apprehension. Exhilaration because things are aligning in ways that feel meaningful. Apprehension because public visibility can seduce you into forgetting humility.
The path the universe put you on requires vigilance. Keep your feet planted in practice, your heart open but not porous, and your boundaries clear. Now, as these patterns begin to organize into a recognizable flow, you are invited toward an activation that is symbolic rather than performative. It is a ritual of alignment designed to seal your inner work into outward coherence. But before revealing the form that activation might take, it helps to look more closely at the kinds of synchronistic evidence that usually precede such an invitation, those apparently small occurrences that viewed together form an undeniable trail. Often the first sign is repetition. Words, images, numbers repeat across media and conversations until you can no longer treat them as coincidence. A phrase like steady presence or hold the light may appear in different places. A particular number sequence may show up in timestamps and license plates during decisive days. You may receive an unexpected message from someone you haven't heard from in years when you were just thinking about them. These echoes are the field's tap on the shoulder.
They are invitations to pay attention, not commands to obey. Other signs are more relational. People begin to show up who seem to reflect the work you've been doing. They are not necessarily fellow truth seekers. Sometimes they are simply people ready for a quieter kind of conversation. You might be invited into collaborations that align not with ambition, but with integrity. You'll also notice doors closing, jobs that no longer fit, groups that drain your energy, and those closures themselves function as alignments, steering you toward a more coherent trajectory. Material shifts can appear too, but they are rarely instantaneous windfalls. Instead, they show up as access to resources that support your capacity to stay steady, a workspace that respects your tempo, a schedule that allows for rest, small financial alignments that relieve pressure. Treat these changes as practical aids, not signs of cosmic favor. Keep your feet grounded. Practical alignment nurtures practice. Practice does not create entitlement. And sometimes the evidence is existential, a deepening of inner peace that remains even when external situations are turbulent. This is the clearest confirmation of all. When your center becomes less moved by circumstance, you know the stabilizer role is taking root. You can feel your nervous system shift into a new baseline. The world still moves, but your vantage has subtly altered. You respond from a frequency that is less reactive and more generative. As these signs accumulate, you may find yourself standing at a threshold. Up until now, much of your work has been inward, dismantling, refining, and practicing presence. The threshold asks whether you will now embody that inner work more visibly. Will you sign a small declaration, make a public commitment, or simply live more consistently with your clarity? The choice is not about grand gestures. It's about whether you will let your life become a steady signal. If you choose embodiment, the activation will not look like a spotlight, but like a seal. It's a symbolic step that marks a willingness to hold steadiness in the face of chaos. It might be as simple as writing a private paragraph that names your readiness, or as public as stating a short affirmation to a small group. The form matters less than the intention behind it, to align your inner frequency with your outward life in a way that supports the field. Before we name a specific form for this activation, there is one more layer to examine: the ethical practices that ensure your presence remains stabilizing rather than coercive. These practices are simple but profound. They include refusing to pressure others to awaken, protecting your own boundaries, practicing compassionate listening, and choosing actions that preserve your coherence. They also include regular rest, small daily rituals that reset your center, and a willingness to be corrected when you drift into egoic territory.
These are not glamorous practices, but they are the infrastructure of long-term steadiness. And then, just as patterns gather and an activation seems inviting, you will likely encounter a final test before the threshold, a situation that requires you to choose between ease and integrity. The narrative often asks for a small, costly kindness, something inconvenient that, if chosen, demonstrates your alignment not only in theory, but in lived action. How you respond is telling. If you act from integrity, the path clarifies. If you choose ease at the cost of coherence, the field reminds you and asks you to realign. It is here, at this turning point, that you begin to see the true shape of the work the universe has entrusted to you. Not salvation or spectacle, but continuous presence. not domination, but humble anchoring. The universe chose you for a path others aren't ready for because your steadiness creates space for others to find their own timing. Your role is to hold, to reflect, and to move from inner clarity to outward coherence. And so, as the pattern becomes clearer and the signs more insistent, you stand before the threshold of activation, a quiet, intimate invitation to commit to this way of being. What follows is a small symbolic practice that can serve as a seal of readiness. But before you enact any ritual, it matters to name the kinds of synchronies that have been showing up for you now, because they point to the nature of your calling in ways words alone cannot. You'll recognize them: echoes across media, doors opening and closing with a peculiar inevitability, a deepening peace that stays even when the world tilts. You remember, perhaps, the morning you realized the line between inner and outer had thinned. A minor decision, saying no to a familiar request, produced an unexpected cascade that aligned the next week in a way that felt like a gentle answer. Or the time a phrase began to appear everywhere, as if the field leaned in to make sure you didn't miss the cue. These moments are not one-time proofs, but ongoing confirmations, and they tend to cluster right before a deliberate step toward embodiment. Then, in the midst of these confirmations, an event arrives that crystallizes the choice, a conversation that asks you to stand publicly by your clarity, a decision point at work that tests your boundaries, or an unexpected opportunity that could amplify your presence if accepted from integrity. How you approach that event will determine whether you remain a private anchor or step into a broader role as an embodied stabilizer. This is where the path often intensifies. The universe does not require spectacle. It requires fidelity. Fidelity to practice, to boundaries, to kindness. If you accept this fidelity, the activation that follows will be a modest but powerful gesture, a declaration that frames your ongoing intention to stay awake and steady.
If you're ready, the field will respond not with fireworks, but with a steadying of circumstances that allows your presence to be more efficacious. And so the invitation stands before you. Will you claim the quiet responsibility of being awake in a world that is still finding its way? The signs are already here, and the possibility of embodiment hums at the edge of your life. If you look back, you can already see the line of small moments that led you to this threshold. If you look ahead, the path widens in ways that require only one simple thing: continued coherence. As you consider this decision, remember the earlier truths. You are not being asked to save anyone. You are being asked to be steady. You are not elevated above others for moral reasons. You are positioned in service to timing. Your steadiness is a gift that matters precisely because it is quiet and practiced. In the hours that follow this realization, you will be presented with a chance to practice the activation that seals your readiness. It will be simple, symbolic, and accessible, an outward acknowledgement of a deep inward choice. And then, in the moments just before you take that symbolic step, the field tends to present a final layer of tests and confirmations, small synchronicities that either ease the way or sharpen your discernment. A meaningful conversation, a minor inconvenience that clarifies your priorities, a letter in the mail that contains a detail you needed. All of these can be part of the field's gentle choreography. Pay attention to the shape of these events. They are the universe's language for aligning inner readiness with outer movement. So you stand now, at the threshold, with a collection of lived signs behind you and an invitation ahead. Your role as a stabilizer is clearer than it may have been months or years ago. Your presence has already shifted your local field. The next move is to translate that inner coherence into a quiet outward seal, an activation that honors humility, respects others' timing, and commits you to steady practice. It is here that the narrative pauses, not because the path is interrupted, but because thresholds deserve attention. Before taking the symbolic step that announces your readiness, there is one last quality to inspect: the softness with which you intend to carry your steadiness. The field, like any living thing, responds best to presence that moves without force.
If you can hold that softness as you step forward, your activation will be true to the role you were chosen for. And then, at the moment the world seems to hush around you, a small synchrony appears, an echo that gathers the threads of the last months into a single, visible chord. A colleague quotes a line you had been thinking. A neighbor brings over something you had casually mentioned loving years ago. A piece of news lands in your lap that clarifies a direction you had only suspected.
These are the field's signposts, delicate and precise, pointing toward embodiment. You feel the activation pulse at the edge of your readiness, but the story does not resolve here. The threshold remains a living hinge, and the act of stepping through will require discernment, humility, and steady attention. Stay present to how the field is speaking. Notice the small confirmations. Keep your practice steady. Your path is not about dramatic transformation. It's about consistent alignment. And as you breathe into that truth, the universe chose you for a path others aren't ready for. You may sense the invitation maturing into a practical, symbolic step that will seal your readiness. When you are ready to take it, it will feel less like a performance and more like returning home to a part of yourself you have been preparing to live from. When you are ready to take it, it will feel less like a performance and more like returning home to a part of yourself you have been preparing to live from. Take a breath in that image for a moment, the sense of returning rather than arriving. The activation you are invited into is not a manifesto, it is a soft attestation. It is the act of saying, to yourself first and to the field second, I will stay awake, I will hold steadiness. The ritual need not be ornate, it should be honest, compact, and rooted in a gesture that matters to you. That is the only requirement worth insisting on, that it matters enough to be remembered. Here are 3 plain forms this activation might take. Choose the one that fits the shape of your life. Each is a symbol, not a spell. 1. A private paragraph. Sit somewhere steady, your kitchen table, a bench in a park, the foot of the bed. Write 4 sentences. Name the truths that anchor you now. Name one small boundary you will hold this week, and close with a pledge to be present. Keep it short. Clarity grows with brevity. Fold the paper and keep it somewhere simple, a pocket, a book, a drawer. Pull it out when you notice the old identities calling you back. The paper is only a hinge. The promise is what matters. 2. A quiet offering aloud. If you prefer sound, choose a short phrase no longer than a sentence. Place your hand over your heart and speak it once with intention. Slow, clear. The phrase can be as private as you like. It might be spoken into your own palm or said into the room where you live. What matters is the echo you leave in your body. The physical act creates a loop that helps the field. Your nervous system, your attention, the people you move among, recognize the shape of your intention. 3. A small, simple object. Pick an ordinary thing, a smooth stone, a scrap of fabric, a pen. Put it somewhere you will see it each morning. When your eyes land on that object, take 30 seconds to feel your belly and to recall your one-line pledge to steadiness. The object is a talisman only in the sense that it anchors a memory.
It will not change the world for you. Instead, it keeps your attention aligned, and that alignment is what allows subtle influence to accrue. None of these forms require skill, certification, or spectacle. All of them ask only for integrity, quiet alignment between what you say inwardly and what you do outwardly. When you choose a form, let it be small enough that you can follow through with it routinely. Consistency matters more than grandeur. After you make the choice, notice the quality of your body as you hold that pledge. This is part of the activation, the somatic sealing. It is not the words themselves, but the way your body receives them. You may feel a lightness, or a resolute gravity, or nothing at all. Any of those responses are normal. If it feels ordinary, that ordinariness is the point. The field prefers reliability over drama. If it feels intense, let it settle without forcing an outcome. Once you seal this small act, you will likely observe a change in how you inhabit time. The attentional economy shifts. Where once you may have expended energy reflexively, you now have an intentional reservoir to draw on. That reservoir is not infinite. It requires tending, rest, simple rituals, boundaries, and the occasional recalibration. Think of it like maintaining a lamp. The lamp's light matters to others in dim weather, but the bulb needs replacing, and dust must be wiped away. Your daily practices are the maintenance. Part of that maintenance includes a few ground rules for working with others. First, practice offering presence without prescription. When someone is in chaos, your steadiness is a resource only when it's offered and not imposed. Listen without trying to fix the structure of someone else's life. Sometimes the best help is the freedom to witness another's process without argument or agenda. Second, model decisions shaped by integrity rather than urgency. Small choices, how you answer a message, whether you escalate a conversation, or how you allocate your time, become demonstrations of an alternative logic. Third, protect your field with gentle boundaries. Saying no to depletion is not selfish. It is stewardship of a resource that benefits those around you. You will be tested. The tests are rarely dramatic. They are the ordinary provocations that used to trigger you. Someone says something dismissive at a meeting. An old friend asks for labor that drains you. A tempting shortcut appears that would enlarge your influence at the cost of your steadiness. These moments are the crucibles of your path. They ask whether your pledge holds under pressure. In those minutes, notice the margin between impulse and action. That margin is your work. Cultivate it like a muscle. When you cultivate it enough, your responses will be governed by resonance rather than reaction. There may be days when the field resists. When you practice steadiness, the surrounding environment does not always harmonize. Sometimes it pushes back.
People may label your changes as eccentricity. Systems that favored old identities may tighten. At such times, remember that cause and effect are not always immediate or obvious. Your presence has a cumulative effect. The stabilizing influence you exercise may not produce headlines, but it reconfigures microclimates, families, teams, neighborhoods, over months and years. Think of it like underground waters slowly altering a shoreline. The visible shifts take time. As you continue, the network of fellow stabilizers will matter more than it did at first, not because you need endorsement, but because resonance amplifies through relational circuits. These connections are rarely theatrical. They are a text message at a hard hour, a shared cup of tea, a silence that reads like affirmation. When you meet a person who recognizes your tempo, you often exchange nothing more than a look, and something in both of you eases. Guard these relationships with the same ethics you apply to all your interactions. No pressure, no savior posture, only witness and mutual care. You may wonder about public visibility. The field sometimes nudges early awakeners toward more visible roles. Invitations appear, talks, podcasts, community gatherings. Visibility is a tool, not a destiny. Accept it when it aligns with your coherence and decline when it threatens your boundaries. If you step into the visible, let transparency and humility be your compasses. Share your experience in ways that invite others to discern their own, not to adopt your path as prescription. Speak less about being special and more about being chosen for a specific work, steady presence, and how that might look in everyday life. A question that arises often is this: how do you know you are not imposing an interpretation on ordinary events? You will find the answer in repeatability and in the tone of your inner field. If your read of signs becomes a narrative that inflates your ego, step back and consult your practices. If the field seems to feed back with consistent confirmations, sustained ease in decision-making, fewer reactive episodes, more soulful alignments, then your interpretation may be useful. Always subject your sense of calling to the test of humility. Invite trusted peers to reflect with you. Let doubt do its proper work, a reality check, not a killer of courage. There are ethical traps to avoid. One is the subtle sense that being chosen makes you morally superior. That is false and corrosive. Another is the comedic temptation to monetize the role in ways that exploit vulnerability. If you offer outputs, services, gatherings, writings, let them come from a place of ethical reciprocity, not extraction. A third trap is impatience, wanting everyone to wake now. That urgency damages the very field you aim to steady. People unfold at their own pace. Your role is to embody a possibility, not to expedite everyone else. As you stabilize, your creative life may shift.
The energy released from shedding old identities often seeks expression. Projects that align with your clarity may present themselves. Books, small collectives, practical offerings that hold virtue in modest ways. Treat these openings as tests of integrity. Does the project preserve your steadiness? Does it require you to model what you hope others might do? If yes, step forward. If no, decline without drama. The power of small, sustained efforts is often greater than the flash of a single big launch. The language you use will evolve. Old phrases that once defined you, titles, roles, statuses, may feel thinner. You will begin to speak in the idiom of process and field rather than claim. That change will matter in how others hear you. When you name things with precision, you invite others into clarity without coercion. Phrases like, "I practice steadiness," or "I'm choosing to anchor my presence here," are less grandiose and more actionable than proclamations of having all the answers. One practical habit you might keep is an inventory of small confirmations, not to feed your ego, but to remind yourself that the field responds. Each week, write down 2 small alignments you noticed: a conversation that landed differently, an unexpected resource, a moment where fear did not lead. These are not proof of destiny. They are journal entries that help calibrate your discernment over time. The habit trains your attention toward gentle evidence rather than toward dramatic affirmation seeking. Another useful habit is a check-in practice with a friend or peer. Once a month, trade accounts of sticking points and small wins. Ask each other one clarifying question. What did you choose this week that preserved your field? Honest peers will tell you when you wobble. That feedback is gold. It keeps the path honest and less mythic. As you move further into embodiment, you may notice a shift in how the field interprets your actions. Where once your choices may have been puzzling, they now resonate as intact with an internal logic. Others may begin to mimic the steadiness in their own ways. This is a delicate ripple effect. You are not converting anyone, but you are offering an example of coherence that can be copied or ignored. Either outcome is acceptable. Don't mistake imitation for awakening. The latter is always an interior work for each person. There will be moments of gratitude. In the quietest hours, you may reflect on how the losses of the early phase, the thinning relationships, the jobs that dissolved, made space for a life more attuned to your inner frequency. These are not tidy narratives. Grief and gratitude often sit side by side. Let them. Gratitude that recognizes the cost without glorifying suffering is a mature kind of appreciation. It keeps you tethered to humility. And remember rest as a practice of steadiness. Rest is not indulgence or avoidance. It is replenishment for continued presence. Schedule it like an appointment.
Engage in activities that truly calm your nervous system. Reading, walking, simple conversation, silence. These moments refill your reservoir of coherence. When you neglect rest in favor of constant action, your stabilizing influence thins. Rest is an ethical act of stewardship for the field. Over months and years, your path will likely bend in ways you cannot predict. Opportunities to steward larger spaces may appear, or you may remain a quiet anchor in intimate circles. Both are valid. The axis is fidelity, not fame. Keep the main thing, the cultivation of presence, central. Let structure follow function. If you take on roles, let them be built around preserving your clarity. Before closing, there is one more caution and one more encouragement. The caution: do not confuse responsiveness for certainty. The field responds in patterns, not guarantees. Miracles are often quiet and incremental rather than sensational. Remain skeptical of absolutist interpretations. The encouragement: your steadiness matters far more than you imagine. Even when the changes you produce are tiny, they compound. A calmer dinner table, a less reactivity-laden meeting, a child who learns to speak with less fear, all are forms of influence that ripple wider than immediate perception allows. Now, if you feel called, here is a very small, optional invitation to formalize the activation you've considered. Choose one of the 3 forms you prefer: write the paragraph, speak the phrase, or place the object. And then, if it feels right, make this short declaration as the seal of that moment. Say it aloud or write it down once. I was awakened before the transition because I was needed awake. I choose to stay steady, to preserve my clarity, and to offer presence without pressure. If you do not wish to make this public, keep it private. If you wish to share it, you may write that sentence in the comments below or send it to a trusted friend. Neither step is required. The universe does not demand your affirmation. The field simply recognizes intention when it has a vessel. Carry the declaration lightly. Let it be a North Star, not a banner. Return to it as needed, and revise the small practices that help you keep faith with it. Notice the folds of your life that shift when you live from that sentence. Keep your humility close at hand. Let your steadiness be your religion, and your daily choices the liturgy. As you step forward from this threshold, remember the core truth again.
The universe chose you for a path others aren't ready for, not because you are above them, but because your presence is needed where timing demands steadiness. This is a responsibility, not a reward, a vocation of being rather than doing. Your primary work is simple and profound: to stay awake, to stay embodied, and to let your life be a steady signal in uncertain weather. Go gently. Return often to the simple practices that refill your reservoir. Celebrate small alignments without expecting spectacle.
Tenderly refuse the seduction of urgency. Keep friends who mirror your steadying. Protect your boundaries with compassion. Rest, and in your resting, remind the field that steadiness is sustainable. The path ahead is not a promise of ease, nor a guarantee of renown. It is instead a call to continued coherence, an ongoing choice to be present. When the world tilts, your steadiness will not stop the tilt, but it will offer a place to stand. That steadiness matters. If this message resonated and you feel the timing of your awakening, you may, if you wish, offer the short declaration now, either within your private practice or by sharing one brief word that captures your experience. Do it in the form that preserves your integrity. Either way, go forward with the quiet assurance that your early awakening was not a mistake, it was an intentional placement. Be steady, be humble, be awake. The path you walk matters simply because you walk it with presence.